What is up, everyone? My name will be Josh. This is Strain Central, and today we are going to be talking about cannabis addiction. So, this is some weird myth that kind of perpetuates the cannabis community that one cannot get addicted to weed, and that's unfortunately just false. So, realistically, we kind of have to break down addiction and what addiction really is for this to make sense. And all addiction really is a dependency, a brain dependency, or a brain disease that makes you consume a substance even though it's having negative consequences. And there actually is a difference between dependence and addiction. So dependence can develop into an addiction, but most of the time addiction is hereditary. It runs in your family's genetics, and they haven't really quite figured out what actually makes addiction happen. But it is said to say that cannabis addiction exists between 9 and 17% of cannabis users, whereas marijuana use disorder or dependence is something close to 30%. So I know one of the first things you're going to think is, well, weed doesn't fucking kill anyone, man. And that is a pretty solid point that the cannabis community uses a lot. So if we compare this to other substances like, let's say, heroin or alcohol, heroin and alcohol have pretty much the exact same percentage. It's between 17 and 50% of people that consume those substances become addicted. And the nicotine is even higher. It's something closer to 30% of people that consume nicotine usually will get addicted to the substance. So the difference between those three substances and cannabis is that those three substances result in death. A lot of the time. There's a lot of people every year that die from opiate overdose. There's a lot of people that die from nicotine consumption. There's a lot of people that die from alcohol consumption. So I'm not saying that cannabis is this horrid drug that should never be consumed or never be trusted because some people get addicted. That all being said, it doesn't mean that people can't get addicted to the substance, can't get addicted to the plant. And I know the cannabis community kind of does stand on that high horse of well, it's not as bad as all these other things, and I don't disagree with you there. It is probably, in terms of drug addiction and drug consumption, the least of the evils. It's not going to kill you if you become addicted to it. But that doesn't mean that people are not addicted to it and that it does not have addictive qualities. So I'm not trying to shit on your plant and be like it's not some miracle substance, because compared to a lot of other substances, it really does have its advantages. So the number is something like 21 million Americans that actually do have a dependency or an addiction to a substance. And I'm not going to say that there's a really large number of those that are cannabis consumers. I believe there was only 138,000 people last year that actually did get help for their cannabis addiction. And if we compare that to opiates or even alcohol, that number is relatively low. And there is a sense and a form of denial there. So there's a lot of denial statements you'll hear people relating to cannabis. And a lot of those are man, my girlfriend broke up with me, or my wife left me because I use weed, but fuck that bitch. Or maybe even something like, I failed a drug test and I'm not going to get a job in that industry, or I'm not going to get a job that drug tests me. Or it might be even as simple as, I can stop, I just don't want to. And all those are realistically forms of denial. So as I stated earlier, there is a chance that you might just have a marijuana use disorder, or you might just be dependent on weed. But if addiction does run in your family, as I said earlier, it's hereditary, and there's a good chance that you are addicted to weed. So the problem here is, since the numbers are so low of people that do become dependent or people that do get addicted, is that the 90% is the loud majority here. So there's a lot of people out there that consume cannabis every single day, have no problems with it, and are like, you're fucking ridiculous. Cannabis isn't, addictive. Cannabis, you can't become dependent. But by the National Institute of Drug Abuse, they do classify and qualify around 10% of people that can actually get addicted to weed. So this number may be rising, as we do see concentrates level rising, as well as seeing THC levels rising pretty consistently. We're kind of the test dummies for cannabis concentrates. I've said that for a long time. Just like the people in the 60s and 70s were kind of test dummies for cigarettes. Everyone was smoking back then. They didn't realize the negative effects that it could have until 20 years later, when everyone had COPD or emphysema or was dying of lung cancer. So don't take me out of context there and be like, are you saying that weed's gonna cause cancer? I thought weed was the cure for cancer. That's not at all what I'm saying. I'm just saying we don't really know the long-term adverse effects, especially on mental health, as you're consuming these concentrates daily. And I am speaking here mostly from experience. I was a daily cannabis consumer. Addiction runs all throughout my family, and there were other substances that contributed to my addiction issues. I was a polysubstance user, which means I was never only just smoking. I was usually smoking, drinking, consuming whatever substance I could really put in my body. I was essentially a trash can for substances. But there was times in my life that I was, specifically only using weed. And something I had an argument in Instagram comments about a couple weeks ago was the adverse effects of marijuana withdrawal. Some people say that I quit smoking weed just fine. There's some people who quit nicotine just fine. It doesn't mean that there's not withdrawal effects that follow. And the withdrawal effects from cannabis really aren't that bad. It's going to be insomnia, lack of appetite, restlessness, anxiety, irritability. It's on the scale of withdrawal effects pretty minor. That being said, there's things like alcohol that when you quit consuming those, you might have seizures, heart palpitations, you're going to have the shakes, the sweats, you're going to have anxiety, and the same can be said about benzos and heroin. Heroin's kind of like apparently having the flu for a couple of days. You feel physically awful. So on this scale of withdrawal effects, cannabis probably does have some of the least harmful withdrawal effects. You're not going to die from consuming weed. You're not going to die from withdrawing from weed. That can't be said for a lot of other substances. So making this video, I'm not trying to call the plant that probably a lot of you consume consistently the worst thing on the planet. What I am trying to do is make aware that there are people who do suffer from that though. So by saying cannabis is addictive, that does not mean that 90% of the users that consume the plant, even on a daily basis, might not get addicted. It's probably only something like 70% that will avoid the marijuana use disorder or the dependence though. So it's definitely possible to be dependent on a substance but not actually be addicted. If I want to bring this into like the alcohol analogy, there's a big difference between a problem drinker and an alcoholic. An alcoholic will go, let's say someone gets put in jail for a DUI. The problem drinker will more than likely be able to stop drinking entirely at that point, and the life implications are enough. It's already destroyed his life enough that he'll be able to quit entirely. Whereas your alcoholic will go to jail, and as soon as they get out of jail, they'll go straight to the nearest liquor store and buy themselves liquor, and probably get themselves in trouble again. So the difference between those two things is that one cannot stop drinking. It's a hereditary disease that is taken over their brain and is not allowing them to quit the use of the substance. The same thing can be said about cannabis. There's a difference between a marijuana use disorder user and I don't want to call it a stoner, because for some reason we've uplifted the term stoner, but let's say someone who's addicted to weed. Someone with the marijuana use disorder, if it starts negatively impacting their personal life, if they're losing jobs, if they're losing relationships, if it has a negative effect on them, they'll be able to either cut back their use or stop their use entirely. Whereas someone who genuinely has an addiction to cannabis, it will have negative life implications. So just because you yourself can smoke weed every day does not mean that there's not 9 to 17% of people that genuinely can't. So, as I've kind of stated in this video, being addicted to weed is not the worst evil. It's not the worst thing. You could be addicted to heroin, you could be addicted to alcohol, you could be addicted to a lot of other awful substances. But what I'm trying to say is, if cannabis is having a negative effect on your life, if cannabis is ruining situations, ruining relationships, ruining jobs, that's on you to weigh what matters to you most. But there's a good chance that you could, if you have addiction that runs throughout your family, genuinely be addicted to a substance. So I do believe the numbers are, this is about adolescent smokers. People who smoke before the age of 18 are 4 to 7 times more likely to develop a marijuana use disorder or a marijuana addiction. And that's probably just something to do with the adolescent brain consuming THC, especially at really high levels, because your brain's still developing, so it's probably not the healthiest thing. So by making this video, I'm not trying to call anyone out, I'm not trying to judge your use, I'm not trying to put myself on a pedestal. bring my ego into it, nor am I trying to bring my own addiction into it. I understand that addiction is personal to me, and it's personal to everyone who has an addiction to any substances. It's one of those things that, like I said, 21 million Americans are addicted to a substance. So choose your evils. If you want to be addicted to cannabis, then so be it. It's probably better than being addicted to a lot of other substances. But bringing light and awareness to this topic is something that I did definitely want to do, because it seems that the 90% of people that are able to consume cannabis on a normal basis, not become addicted, not develop a marijuana use disorder, try to disqualify the 10% that are suffering, or the 10% tries to hide in that 90%. The reality is 9 to 17% of people who consume cannabis can become addicted. So by saying that cannabis isn't addictive, what you're essentially doing is discrediting the 10% of people that can get addicted to the substance, and the substance can have negative effect on their life. On the legalization front, that does not help you at all, because what society's going to do is they're going to see those 10% of people that can't consume normally, and they're going to judge all cannabis consumers like that. They're going to lump all of the people who can use cannabis on a daily basis, not develop a disorder, not develop an addiction, and they're going to assume that you're not the vast majority. The reality is the vast majority of people can consume cannabis, they can control their consumption, and they can live normal, productive, awesome lives being daily cannabis consumers. That's what's wonderful about the plant, is a lot of people can consume normally. Unfortunately, there is a percentage, a small percentage, 1/10, so 1 out of every 10 users is a pretty base fact for that will develop a dependency or an addiction, and it will have negative effects on their life. So the reason I made this video is specifically just to question your own use. Have someone else even look into your own use, because as I talked about earlier, there is that denial factor that some people are going to bring excuses or make up excuses being like, well, I want to be dependent on weed. And that is a choice you get to make. I'm not trying to tell you what to do. As I've said, I'm still addicted to nicotine. Nicotine has a much higher rate of addiction. Nicotine has a much higher rate of death when it comes to consuming. So I'm still addicted to at least one of the greater harms. That being said, I'm choosing to not consume any psychoactive substances, alcohol, cannabis, and basically every other drug falls into that. And even nicotine technically is psychoactive, it's just not mind-altering. That's why a lot of people in sobriety do continue to consume nicotine and caffeine. They do have psychoactive effects, but they're not inherently mind-altering. And you might be like, well, what about the shamans that use nicotine in the Amazon rainforest to have their ceremonies? That's a much stronger form of nicotine, which can be mind altering. We're just consuming essentially a watered down version of nicotine. But that's about all I really have to say with today's video. I just wanted to make a video on cannabis addiction, bring awareness to the topic, because it's not really talked about. And as a cannabis advocate, I want everyone to be able to consume this plant freely and safely. No one should be getting locked up in a prison cell for this, so we need to make it nationally and, accepted worldwide. And coming to terms with some of the realities are going to be a big step in this. If a medicine wants to be recognized, it has to be known that some people can become addicted, and we have to show them a path that if you are addicted, you're able to get yourself help or avoid some of these pitfalls. So that's about all I have to say on this topic. I will be working to shoot for like 2 or 3 videos a week from here on out, so look for more consistent content, and I definitely hope you guys were able to get something out of this. But stay positive, stay medicated. Peace, friends.